luckily I got sent a link by a guy who's fairly active but undercover, if you like, and he sent me this YouTube channel from a guy called Bjorn Anders Bull Hansen. Obviously not in this country. He's got a lovely accent, quite a lot of subscribers, but he's talking about the Agenda 2030. He calls it the wealth transfer, which he's bang on. He's literally on the money. But the particular topic is the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Yeah, managed to get that one out. Now, I had a quick look. And this is an EU directive, but as you probably all know, that many of the things that go through the EU and are dealt with there, we end up taking on board because it's a good idea. And this is all about reducing carbon footprint, emissions, etc., low energy, and all the rest of it. But the kickback of this is this: that all of these houses that we live in nowadays that haven't been built within the last sort of few years are inefficient. They emit large amounts of heat. They use larger, or their carbon footprint's terrible. And if we look here, I'm going to have a quick read. It says the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, revised in 2018. The directive will help reach the buildings and renovation goals set at the European Green Deal. European Green Deal is just one massive money grab, grift, tax, whatever. It's a way of relieving us of all of our money. And at the moment, there's lower class, middle class, upper class, all right? What they want to do is wipe out the middle class, screw the lower class, and there be a few people at the top. Now, some of you will go, oh, what you on about? Look, if you don't believe me, mate, do us a favour, switch off, go back to whatever it is you're doing and wait for it to happen to you. By the way, when it does, I told you so. Meanwhile, for those of you who are interested, it goes through this, right? Now, I want you to look up for yourself, and it's literally, just type in Google, the Energy Performance and Buildings Directive, because I listened to him and typed it up for myself. It's there in black and white. But it's all about, as you go through, the milestones that they expect to reach and the dates, all right? And all of this has to be done by 2050. But along the way, there are milestones. So let me see if I can skip through this. And as a dyslexic, this will be fairly interesting. As of 2021, all new buildings must be a zero or nearly zero energy buildings. Interesting. And it goes through, look, I'm going to try and make this as quick as possible. Yeah. At present, about 35% of EU buildings are over 50 years old, and 75% of the buildings, it's basically going on to say that all of the buildings within the EU that are government owned will need redressing. But the big part of this, and the important part of this, is the guy that we're talking about in this video has decided that for you to bring your buildings up to spec, and he's made a average building, whatever that is, should we go for a 3 or 4 bedroom house maybe in Great Britain, is going to cost over there about €100. That 100,000, by the way, is not 100 euros. And with that in mind, I don't know how many of you would have the equivalent in pound notes of €100,000. I certainly don't. Most people don't. Most people live from month to month or week to week, depending on how you get paid. And by the end of the time you've paid your rent, you've paid for the vehicles that you need that are getting screwed into the ground, and all of the upkeep of things around you, the food bill, the electric, the gas, and all the rest of it. Most of you do not have a pot to piss in. Some of you are fortunate enough to be on a higher wage income, and you might actually be able to put some money aside, but 100 grand? Probably not. So what happens if you can't reach this? That's the question. They obviously don't mention that in here, but let me paint a scenario, because do you remember Klaus Schwab saying you'll have nothing and you'll be happy? Some of you may, some of you may not. If you haven't, literally look into it. It's very important, right? But suggesting that you've already heard this, my question was, how are they going to relieve us from having something to having nothing? That was the part I couldn't get around. But this makes a lot of sense. They want to break the chain between owner and the person who has this bestowed upon them or to them at death. So let's just imagine I have 30 grand in the bank. Now that would be a massive, I've got holes in my socks, right? So that's where we are. Okay. But maybe I've got 30 grand in the bank, right? Of disposable money that I can, whatever. And it's going to cost 90 grand. What happens? Is there a loan that you can get? Now, let's suggest there's not, right? Because if they were going to bail everybody out, then it would be pointless, wouldn't it? But let's suggest that now, if you don't bring your house up to this spec, right, you get fined constantly, monthly, weekly, yearly. I don't know how they'd run it, but so they're not going to give you any financial help to get you through this mess, right? So you now have this bill and a house that's now up to their standards. Now, they're there just to run the country, not to dictate to us, but they've taken that stance. So what next? Sell the house? Nope. Sorry, mate. You can't sell a house that's not up to scratch because it's illegal, because that's the law they would have brought about. So you're now stuck with a house that you can't afford to renovate because you don't have the cash and you can't legally sell, that they're now fining you for, right? For every month you don't get the work done. What do? Go to a family member? I don't know. Not all of us have rich family. I certainly don't. Right, so what happens now? Well, let me paint another scenario to you. They've come up with this great scheme where you can hand the house back to the government so you don't get yourself in any further trouble. Maybe even if they're really kind, they'll do the work on your house and let you live out your years in that house for low rent, okay, until you pass away, at which point it goes back to the government. Now, where does this happen? I'm just trying to think. Oh, yeah, China. Because in China, you can buy a house, fine. You can buy a house, you can rent, pay the mortgage on it, but when you die, it doesn't get passed on to your family. It goes back to the state. So, am I dreaming too much here to assume that this might be their plan? But what happens if, say, for instance, you bequeath it to your family member? Will they make ways that you can't do that because it's not up to spec? That any time that this changes hands before the deadline of 20, whatever it is, you then can't change hands until it's up to spec. In the same way that you wouldn't be able to sell a house today that was brand new unless it was up to spec. I don't know. At which point do they bring all these rules in? But nevertheless, if their agenda is this much that all of these houses have to be up to a certain spec by a date, then it's going to cost you dearly. And especially some of these old houses. I mean, take this one, for instance. This one's got double glazing. I live in a flat. However, the double glazing is awful. It hardly fits. This thing emits heat like it's going out of fashion. It has damp. All right. It is the way it is. Right. But some of you may say, well, I don't own a house, so I'm all right. No, you're not. Because here's the deal. If you've got a private tenant, a landlord, I should say, then he's got to some way, right, be able to pay for all this. What do you think is going to happen to your rent? That's assuming that he can actually afford to and he doesn't hand it back to the state, at which point you became renting off the state. And that becomes, well, more difficult because imagine that social scoring. Well, if you're renting off the state and your social score's not up to date, how is that going to affect you? Can you see where this is going? Because at the end of the day, we're running there. And the European Union, even though we're not in it, we are very much pressured by it and influenced by it. So there you are. And it does seem like our illustrious leader at the moment does seem to want to try and get us in every which way he can back into the European Union. But he would, because he is Klaus Schwab's little cherub, isn't he? So bear that in mind. And you're buying a property, or if you're thinking about selling a property in the future, or if you're actually thinking about bequeathing any property to your loved ones, or you're on an inheritance list, they will find a way of driving a wedge into all of this to make sure that you have to part with a huge sum of your cash before any of this can happen. Because what they're trying to do is literally turn all of you into hand-to-mouth creatures. You do not have any money in the bank, so you have absolutely no fallback. And when you've got no money in the bank and you have to work week to week, you'll have nothing. You'll be happy, right? And you have to live wherever it is they tell you. Things are going to change massively. And the middle class, which seem to be some of the least enlightened people in the world, yes, they know how to travel to Doha, or they know about the Tibetan monks or whatever it is, but they haven't got a frigging clue about what's happening behind their backs and the crimson crowbar, if you like, that's going to get between them and their wedge. And when it relieves them of their cash, they'll ask you, the lower classes why you didn't do more. So here we are. We're stuck in a bit of a thing. But nevertheless, I just thought I'd share this little nightmare with you. And I would go and subscribe to this guy. He seems really interesting. Bjorn Anders Bull Hansen. I certainly am going to listen to him because he seems very clued up and he is very chilled. So there it is. Anyway, a few videos going out at the moment, and I'll speak to you soon.